Hello, everybody. People are lining up to get into the meeting, and warmly welcome to all of you who are already here. Can you hear me? Yes, good, great. So welcome to this first webinar arranged by the Nordic Network for Queer Archives and History, and hosted by the Live Archive and Library of the Queer Movement in Sweden, and the eminent archivist and co-founder Olof Kihlström, who will present his and other people's work with CLIT. And I'm proud to just hand over the microphone to you, Olof, so that you can go on with the presentation and introduction to your presentation. And applaud for you.
Thank you, Pia. Welcome, everybody. I'm Olof Kihlström, working as the archivist of QRAB, this Archives and Library of the Queer Movement. Does anyone hear me? Yep, it says my microphone is activated. Good. So just a bit of housekeeping. First, I will hold my presentation in English. There are a few illustrations with Swedish text, but I will explain everything. And there will be time for questions and discussion afterwards. If you have a question that requires immediate explanations, please just raise your hand and Pia will interrupt me so that you can ask your question and I can explain if there's anything that needs explaining. The end time is set for 4 o'clock. There is possibility to drag on for a few minutes, but I'll try my best to keep my presentation within the timelines. So let me share something here. Oh. There we go. I will talk about CLIT. Pia said CLIT. I usually call it QLIT or QLIT. And I will explain exactly what it is during this presentation. Just a brief background on where QLIT originated. If I can just... Apologies. We had a technical rerun before this webinar, but now something seems to have gone awry. Oh, here we go. Oh. Okay, maybe this will not work perfectly just as yeah, there we go. Sorry. So QLIT is an abbreviation standing for the Queer Literature Indexing Thesaurus. Maybe a few of those words are difficult for people, but I will explain them. QLIT started or was developed within the QueerLit project, which was a broader project aiming to build a database with Swedish LGBTQI fiction within the National Library Catalogue, making this literature easier to find. And associated with that database was also this thesaurus, which is a means to make it easier to search for literature, to find the books that you're interested in. It was a research infrastructure project, so our main audience were researchers, but it's turned out to be of quite good use to regular people as well. The QLIT thesaurus is a linked data vocabulary with approximately 900 terms. I'm going to be speaking about terms or subject headings or subject terms interchangeably. This means that the 900 terms are the words that can be applied to the catalog. The QLit is based on the Homosaurus, which is an international English language vocabulary for LGBTQ+ issues, developed by Dutch and US American institutions in collaboration. I will present the Homosaurus a bit more towards the end of this presentation. QLit is integrated within LibrisXL, which is the national library cataloging platform in Sweden. So anyone working with LibrisXL or in all the libraries around Sweden can use the vocabulary to add to index literature. It's not confined within the project's scope to do the actual indexing. So anyone attached or working within the LibrisXL platform can use the QLit. And if you're curious to explore more about these terms, its subject headings, here's the address for the project platform webpage. This address will return at the end of the presentation, so you don't have to write it down quickly right now. So the words queer literature indexing thesaurus, what do they mean? They can have different meanings in different contexts, but to give some sort of description of what I or we use them as, I will explain now. Queer is used in this context as a rather widely defined umbrella term, encompassing, for example, LGBTQI persons or experiences, but also a wider field of practices, experiences, identities, perspectives that is somehow breaking with cis and heteronormative concepts, roughly speaking. Literature might seem like the easiest word, maybe. Like I said, the QLit thesaurus was developed to be applied to fiction, but it can be also used for indexing nonfiction. But there are some aspects of the thesaurus that are specifically aimed at capturing aspects of fiction. Indexing is what librarians do with a thesaurus. When you're sitting with the catalog and you have a book in front of you and you want to make that book easy to find for a reader, it's good to describe what is this book about. You have the title, you have the author, you know how many pages it is, but what is the book actually about? This requires indexing. So the thesaurus, the QLit, is like a toolbox that can be used, but it requires applications. The toolbox itself doesn't solve any problems on its own. It requires that it's actually used and applied to the catalogs. And thesaurus may be the most strange word for many. A thesaurus can have different meanings. It can be like a lexicon in some cases, but in library and information retrieval contexts, a thesaurus is a structured, hierarchical set of subject terms. So we have the subject terms which describe a work, but there's also relations between these terms, oftentimes hierarchical, but not only. This was a very brief description of what QLit is. We'll talk a little bit more about the thesauri aspect. Thesauri is the plural of thesaurus. One thesaurus, many thesauri. Thesauri are like I said, controlled vocabularies. It's a limited set of terms. The point of it being a controlled vocabulary is so that people using it for searching know what they can expect. It's understandable in a way if you get into it. It can't be any words, but just a limited number of words, so that if you're, for example, searching for cats, the word that you used is cats. It isn't cat, it isn't kitten, it isn't pussy, it isn't any other word for cat. The words, the terms, the subject headings are meant to describe aboutness. That is, what is this book actually about? So it's not, there are different ways to describe a book. You can describe it as a work of fiction, a cooking book, a science fiction book. These are not the subject headings that I'm talking about now, because a cooking book isn't about a book about cooking books. There are books about cooking books, so the term cooking book can be applied as a subject heading, but not to actual cooking books, but books, for example, analyzing the history of recipes or something like that. There are general thesauri, which are meant to be used to describe any book. So they can have quite a lot of subject headings or terms. I've given a few examples here. LCSH is the US American Library of Congress subject headings. It's also used quite a lot in libraries around the world for English-speaking access. In Finland, there's ISA. I don't remember the Finnish, what it means, how it's read out in Finnish, but it's practically general Finnish subject headings. In Norway, I think, I'm not an expert on the other Nordic countries, but the situation in Norway seems to be a bit complicated with quite a lot of different systems in use at different libraries. But there's one big thesaurus called Bibi. And in Sweden, we have SAU, the Swedish subject headings. And these are, like I said, general. They have quite a lot of terms, but they don't always go that much into detail or are very specific with like granular subjects. So you can have, for example, cats. Maybe this is a bad example. I haven't checked out what, for example, SAU, which subject headings they have on cats. Maybe they are thousands of different cats. But in principle, you can have the subject heading cats, but maybe not Burma cats or different types of cats. So it's general, many terms, but not often very detailed. But there are also specialized thesauri. For example, MESH or cow or QLIT, of course. MESH is the medical subject headings, English language thesaurus, with a lot of medical terms, different illnesses, symptoms, body parts that are very detailed. Cow is the subject heading list of Kvinsam, the Swedish library for gender research, which I should say, Kvinsam is the institution that will take over the maintenance of QLIT and the QLIT database, because the QLIT project is ended, or at least ending as we speak. And one final point I would like to make is that these thesauri, these words, they're always created and applied within specific social structures. They're never objective or neutral, which doesn't mean that they couldn't be used or shouldn't be used, but it's important to keep this in mind, that there is always someone deciding what term should be included, and also someone working with the actual indexing, someone applying these terms to the catalog. And people are people. You can strive to be objective and neutral, but people always carry some biases or expectations or preconceptions with them. So I said that the general thesauri oftentimes are quite, they're broad, but not very deep, if you say. So they don't go into very much detail. The example I have here is from SAU, the Swedish subject headings, which has a term called bisexuals. So bisexuals can be applied to the catalog within the SAU thesaurus. There are a few narrower, that is more specific terms associated with bisexuals in SAU. We have coming out, bisexual men, bisexual parents, bisexual women, and also a related term that is bisexuality. So this is the toolbox that SAU offers for describing a book about some sort of bisexual. Within QLit, we go into quite a bit more detail and provide these terms. I had to make the font smaller so that everything would fit here. I'm not going to read them all, but you can see we have the term bisexuals and quite a lot of narrower terms. In SAU there are 4 more specific terms, and QLit has 16. So we're 4 times as detailed as SAU. So you can, for example, if there is a book about older bisexual women, you can apply the term older bisexual women. In SAU, you would have to add bisexuals or bisexual women and maybe older women as 2 separate terms. And we also have quite a lot of more related terms, not only bisexuality, but biphobia, parents of bisexuals, persecution of bisexuals, and a few others. So this is a much richer vocabulary that can be used, so that people, both indexing and searching for books, can be more specific with what a book is about, what they're looking for, or what they're describing. I've used a couple of terms already, like narrower and broader terms. I thought I'd explain a bit more about the anatomy of how these terms are structured. Like I said, it's a structured set of, it's a structured data vocabulary. So there are terms and there are relations between terms. We have the example non-binary people, in Swedish, icke-binära personer. At the top, it says non-binary people, which is the subject heading. And then there's a scope note, which describes how the term should be used. This is useful both for the people doing the indexing, so the people ascribing the terms to the catalog, and also, of course, for the people searching the catalog, because words can have slightly different meanings sometimes. But in the context of QLit, this defines how we apply this term, so that people know what to expect. And there are a couple of variants. The ones listed here are, for example, NBs, non-binary people, non-binaries, and NBs. These aren't the words that are visible in the catalog, but if a person looking for non-binary people is more comfortable using the term NBs, and that is what they type into the search field, the results come back with the works indexed with non-binary people. So you can have synonyms, you can have abbreviations, you can have different variants of words that make searching more easy and possible. And at the bottom here, we have an identifier, which is, it has the shape of a web link, but the point is that there is something defining this term or identifying this term that isn't the actual words. It isn't non-binary people, but instead the string of randomized letters and numbers you see at the end. It's UW18HZ12, which doesn't mean anything. But when you have sort of this randomized identifier, you can change the actual, what is called the preferred term, in this case, non-binary people, because terminology changes over time. Maybe someday there will we will realize that non-binary people isn't what most people call themselves or this group of people, but maybe, for example, NBs has become more prevalent, and then we can change the preferred term to NBs or something else, but keep the stable identifier. And this also makes it possible to have different language versions within one thesaurus. So we can have one Swedish preferred term, icke-binära personer, one English language preferred term, non-binary people, but they are referring to the same identifier. I hope that makes sense. And then there are these relations between the terms. Here we continue with the example of non-binary people. And see there is a broader term, trans people, which is more general. And then we have the narrower terms, which are more specific. We have non-binary children, non-binary youth, and older non-binary people. And then there are related terms, which has a more loose associative relationship with the term. We can, for example, see here agender people, or non-gendered people, or FTX or MTX. So these are terms that there isn't a fixed relation between non-binary people and agender people. But people searching for non-binary people might be interested in also looking at agender people or androgynous people. So it's a sort of tipping function, so that people can find other ways to search. And at the end, we have the exact and close matches, which relates to other thesauri. For example, you have, and these matches can be close or exact. We have close matches to the homosaurus, the term non-binary people, and to Sau's icke-binära personer. These words mean exactly the same thing. And then there are close matches, for example, to NCSH, gender non-conforming people. Gender non-conforming people isn't exactly the same as non-binary people, but there is a certain overlap at least. And this makes it also possible to search, depending on how you set up your interface. You can search for gender non-conforming people and get results indexed with icke-binära personer. When we developed Qlit, we did a little queer rule breaking, I've called it here. There is an international standard for how thesauri should be constructed and used. We try to do our best to follow that standard, but there are a few instances where we sort of break the rule or move towards the boundaries of these standards or rules. Oftentimes thesauri are based on what's called literary warrant. That means that when a term is added to a thesaurus, there should always be some sort of work that it can be applied to. You don't add the term non-binary people if there isn't a book about non-binary people. Just a way to keep the thesauri streamlined in a way. We thought a bit outside of that box, and I call it here imaginary inclusion, which means that we added terms that we weren't certain we could actually apply to a catalog post. The reason behind this was that the project is time limited. We can't, or we have at least limited resources to update it. So we want it to be as inclusive as possible from the get-go, because we can imagine that there one day will be, for example, a book about non-binary people. So then we included that term, even though maybe we didn't know that there actually was a book. And we also made sure that within the LGBTQI umbrella, we added terms equally between, so there's a lesbian term, there's a gay term, there's a bi term, or two for bi men and women, and trans terms and queer terms and intersex terms. So we made the playing field level in that way. I've talked about aboutness, that thesauri or subject headings are meant to describe what a book is about. When it comes to fiction, this can be tricky because fiction can often be interpreted in different ways. And especially when we came to the older literature, we found that it's not always, or it's rather very rarely explicit. It's not explicitly a book about men loving men, for example, but you can sort of read between the lines. There is symbolism hinting at that being the topic, or it's been read as that. So we included terms dealing with symbolism. We had, for example, mirror symbolism, rainbow symbolism, antique symbolism, a few others. And when those terms are used, it doesn't mean that this is a book about mirror symbolism. It is a book that uses mirror symbolism. So it's sort of a borderline breaking the rule about aboutness. And there's also historical terms. Like I said, terminology changes over time. And the words used in the 19th century aren't the same ones as we use today. So if we have a book about where the author writes about hermaphrodites, for example, we wanted to include that in a way that makes it obvious and clear that maybe this person doesn't mean hermaphrodites as what we would call intersex people, because the term could have different meanings. So we have a list of historical terms that aren't applied to books about hermaphrodites, but can be applied to books where these terms are used. This isn't actually breaking a rule, but just making it easier for the users. Oftentimes, thesauri, even when they have web presentations, it's just a long list of words, maybe alphabetically organized. We tried to gather the different words within 9 categories of themes. So we have one set of words dealing with discrimination, hate, and violence, one set of words dealing with identities and practice, one set dealing with relations, and so on, so that people don't have to browse through the entire list looking for the topics that they're interested in, but they can go to, I want to read something about movements and rights, and then they can go to the movements and rights collection to see the subject terms related to that theme. And finally, this isn't about the construction of the thesaurus, but how we we used it within the Queerlet project. We used it for what's called exhaustive indexing, which is quite rare in libraries, often because of time pressures and labor cost. The indexing is done on a quite large, or you don't look at all the details in the book. You see that, oh, this is a book about lesbians. But you don't read the entire book to see, oh, is it a book about lesbians having children, or is it a book about lesbians going swimming? But we tried to be as detailed as we could within the limits of the project. I see I'm running a bit out of time. I will do this a bit quicker.
Okay.
The impact of QLit, we ran QLit as a project during 2021 to 2023-24. But like I said, it's already integrated within Libris, the national library platform. And we also actually, based on the terms that we developed, were able to get SAO, the general thesaurus, to do quite a lot of updates, additions, and revisions. If you want to see the full list, you can scan the QR code here. Local libraries can import QLit terms to their catalogs. And maybe we at least planted the seed that the Royal Library, the National Library in Sweden, would start looking at a way to work with these relevance graded subject headings. Like I said, we were very detailed oriented when indexing. We, even if there was a book dealing mostly about straight cis people, but there's a short passage about something trans maybe, we index this as a trans, with trans subject headings. And maybe they will look at some way to signal or to make it possible to apply these more peripheral terms as well. And hopefully it's a project that can inspire others to do similar things. Now I will speak about the Homosaurus, the English language thesaurus, which they're calling it an international LGBTQ plus linked data vocabulary. English language based. They try to be international. It's applied in libraries across the world, but it is quite English or centered. Like I said, it was developed by the Dutch and US American organizations. It's quite a big thesaurus. They have 3,086 terms as we speak, but they add more terms continually. So it's more than 3 times as big as the QLit thesaurus. This summer, hopefully, there will be a multilingual interface released. Just the web page in different languages. The terms are still mainly in English at least, but the web page will be available in different languages. But there are also several ongoing projects working on translation on the terms themselves. I see here now I missed adding the Dutch translation, but we have Dutch, Bengali, French, Hindi, and Spanish translations working within different projects and in different ways. Some of them are working quite with focus groups, community input. Other are more machine translating oriented. But there are projects working on this. And if you want to look more at the Homosaurus, you have the webpage here, homosaurus.org. I will just wrap up with speaking a bit more about the translation aspect of this and some of the difficulties we ran into when working with the QLit development. Like I said, we based it on the Homosaurus and translated a few words, added a few others, tweaked and changed some things. And when we translated things, we also saw that the matches that were made between the Homosaurus and the Library of Congress subject headings, because in the Homosaurus they also have these links to other thesauri. These matches were far from perfect, as I will show. You can see the Homosaurus term vibrators for sex toys were matched to the industrial concrete vibrator machines in the LCSH. They are not the same thing, at least for most people. The Homosaurus term describing the predominantly male gay subculture was matched with the bears in the wood. All these things, we emailed them and said, please change this, and it's updated now. But it's a good example to show that I think these matches were made using some sort of automated machine process, seeing bears in one place, bears in another place. They're the same thing. They're not. Queens. The Homosaurus queens aren't the same as the LCSH royal queens. So these are just examples of what's called homonyms, words. It's the same word but different meanings. They can be quite easily detected if you either do some work on it or have some sort of sophisticated language modeling software. But there are also other more tricky language questions. For example, we have, for the context, the Homosaurus term homophiles is defined in their scope note as outdated, describing the movement in the 50s, 60s, based on sort of respectability, proper gaze, not making a fuss, but trying to gain respect through being presentable. And it says it's outdated. While if this would be translated to Norwegian, homophile is still in quite general use and hasn't this outdated aspect, as far as I'm aware, at least. So if you're translating homophiles, what does it actually mean? We also have pronouns, which is a bit more of a grammar question. And there's a subject heading in Homosaurus, they, them, which you can think quite a lot about. What does they, them mean in different language context? Is it in Swedish den, or hen, hennom? In Norwegian, hen, in Finnish, hen, hennen, henta, etc. Are these equivalents? Is it the same thing? Also, a question about more like what discursive structures are carried within the language. The Homosaurus has two separate terms for gender and sex in the bodily sense. Separate terms. In the QLit, we created one combined subject heading called kön, and then divided that into 4 more specific: biological kön, legal kön, kön's identity, and kön's expression. So this shows how different languages sort of work in different ways, and it's not always easy to just make a one-to-one translation. This is my final set of slides. I run over time a bit. A concluding point: languages are situational. Universality is impossible, and this goes both for when you are creating a thesaurus in your own language. The language you are using can change over time, and other people can use other ascribe other meanings to the language. And of course, between different languages, it could be even bigger differences. Resources are needed. These can be technological, but have to be at least somewhat sophisticated and sensitive in some way, and or labor resources to actually check that. Does the bears in the Pride Parade, are they the same as the bears in the forest or not? It's important to have input from communities and scholars. Within the Queerlit project, we had workshops with the public and the scholars, different occasions, providing input to which terms do people actually use, and how can you have different perspectives on different terms. I think this is really important if you're trying to develop some sort of thesaurus, that it's not just one individual deciding. There's a question of integration versus separatism. The Queerlit project was set up as a separate project, but we collaborated with the National Library and integrated the thesaurus in the National Library structure. And then also in the end, the work we had done with creating our own separate thesaurus could be, it was useful for the SAO, the general subject headings thesaurus as well. So it's not always a dichotomy. It's not that you have to be integrated or you have to be working separately, but there is a tension there. And there are benefits with working separately, and there are benefits with making the thing that you create more widely available. And finally, I would say that it's worth it. Despite all these challenges, we've had so much positive feedback from both the Queerlit project generally and the Queerlit thesaurus. People finding it very helpful to find the literature that they're searching for. And this is finally the address once more to the Queerlit thesaurus if you want to explore what terms to use and also search for literature in Swedish at least, and some of the national minority languages in Sweden. So this was my presentation, and now we still have a little time for questions and discussions.
Thank you, Olof, for this elaborated presentation of Queerlit. And I'll try to keep track of hands in the air. So if anybody have any questions, please just signal. Someone's going to get in, or? Rickard, was it you?
I think Øystein raised the hand.
Yeah, Øystein, okay. You have to put your microphone on. Kan du sätta på? Øystein, we can't hear you.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes, please, thank you.
Thank you. I have a question regarding, do you have collected the most popular search words in the library?
We have, I don't have them at the top of my head, but we have tracked. The Queerlit project produced a separate web page, an interface for searching using the thesaurus more integrated. And the searches that are done on that web page, we keep track of. The searches in the Libris catalog, the national catalog, we don't know what they're searching for. So we have that list. I'm sorry, I don't have it in front of me at the moment.
Is that common? Can you reach it on internet and look at it, or is it closed?
No, I could try to get hold of it and send it to you if you like, or make it.
Yeah, thank you. That would be fine.
If you want, you can write your email address in the chat.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other question from someone? Ola, you have one question, right? You need to put your microphone on.
I think I have.
Okay,
Um,
please.
I would be curious about the length of the project and the amount of people that you were sort of keeping busy with this, because especially if you say that this you aimed at exhaustive indexing, that means that actually someone needs to read a book, and that will take some time. So how,
Yes.
the question is sort of like, if in Finland we would aim at something alike, how much workforce should we sort of apply money for?
Yeah, it was a three-year project, and we were 8 people working, not full time. I don't think anyone was working full time. Yeah, one person was working full time as a just keeping the project in order. But most of us worked between 25-30% for 3 years. And the development of the thesaurus was my main responsibility. I worked 25%, but also did other things. And then the indexing were 4 people working, most efficiently for maybe a year and a half, 2 years. And we indexed 2,000 books during that time. We didn't actually read all the books from page to page. Some books we looked at reviews or just flipped through the pages quite briefly. But it's, yeah, it takes time. And it's also one thing that we found out was that, of course, the thesaurus has to be finished before you can start indexing. So it's good if you're applying for a project that you have the timeline that not everybody start working at the same time, because the people doing the indexing will need the thesaurus to be ready first.
So just for clarification, those 8 people working for 3 years were working solely on translating Homosaurus and figuring out what might be the Swedish words for it.
No.
No.
Rather the opposite. It was me mainly working with the development of the thesaurus, with some input from another person who I was just sitting in the same office as, but they didn't work with the thesaurus. So the thesaurus was one person working for maybe, say, a year mainly, and then fine-tuning it for 2 years, for 25%.
Okay, are you good with that answer, Tula? Great. So we have another question from Iris, I think, in Finland. You could also present yourself a little with just a word, where you come from, so the other participants know.
Yeah, I'm Iris Olavinen from the Finnish Labour Archives. And just to continue that topic that Tula raised, was it like university project or collaborative project, or were the people librarians or archivists or who were working with this?
Yeah,
Maybe I missed something, but if you
no,
already
no,
told.
I
Yeah.
skipped over that part. The project was based at Gothenburg University, but it was a collaboration with people working also in Växjö and Södertörn Högskola. So the people working were in at least 3 different places, but the project was managed by the University of Gothenburg. And the funding came from the Riksbankens Jubilee Fund, a bank dealing out money for research projects.
Okay.
And I'm a librarian, and there were also 2 other librarians working in the project, and literary scholars and IT people as well.
Yeah. Thank you.
This bank, it's National Bank. It's one of the main research funders in Sweden. Yeah. So we have some more minutes for questions. So if anybody else want to have some kind of clarification of something that Ola was discussing, so please raise your hand. Was that a hand, Runar? Yeah.
Yes, I just want to thank you for the presentation. I'm not a librarian, so this is not my field, but I see the value of the work, and I know some of the problems librarians have with outdated terms and so on. So I really just wanted to say that and just make a positive evaluation of it. And I think it's very important also that we look into this in Norway and how we can use it with librarians, not only the people at the Queer Archive. We have no librarians at the Queer Archive in Norway, but we have some librarians at the university library, and I'm sure they will find this useful. And I also hope that you have presented this project for general librarians and academic librarians in Sweden. You should probably also do that in Norway, so we'll look into that if you haven't already done it in other countries. Have you? Or
we have held quite a few presentations in different Swedish contexts, library conferences and such, and also a few international conferences, IFLA conference, a few digital humanities conferences as well. But the project is wrapping up as we speak. I think the last person is finishing this week. But most of us are enthusiastic about spreading the word anyway. And like I said, Kvinnsam, which is associated with our department within the University Library in Gothenburg, will continue to maintain the database.
It's wonderful to have this collaboration also with Kvinnsam. But they are very professional and a part of the so it's like I think it's going to be like an inspiration, and I'm sure it's going to be very useful for our librarians and also other librarians. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Runar, from Shaped Archive, or the Queer Archive in Norway. And I can just add that we have a few university librarians in Norway that followed this presentation. Yeah, we have some minutes left for a last question, if someone have one. Øystein again?
Yes, hello again.
Yeah, and who are you, Øystein? Can you tell us?
I am a representative for the Forbundet for Transpersoner in Norway. And I do have a question. We have a site in the Pride in Bergen next week. And I wonder, Olav, maybe use some of your information on our Pride stand next week in Bergen.
Could you repeat?
May I use some of your stuff on our site in the Pride week next
Of
week
course.
in Bergen?
Just spread the word.
Yes, information.
Yeah, I think on the webpage there is a folder you can download.
Let's see.
Just check. It's in Swedish, I think. Let me just check that it's in place.
I know I was not able to post on the chat to post my email address.
Yeah, I saw. If you want, do you have? Are you able to send it some other way?
Yes, I will try to do that, of course.
I can't find the information on the webpage as we speak, but if you find anything useful on the webpage, just
I will do that. Thank you very much. And thank you for the presentation. It was very interesting.
Thank you.
Okay, the last
There was one more.
question.
Yep.
Yeah, the last question goes to Sigrid. Please present yourself also, Sigrid. Put your microphone on, Sigrid. We can't hear you. Yeah, we can't hear you. Sorry. There is one last possibility, Sigrid, and it's if you go to questions and answers, it's the little thing beside the chat. You can write your question to Olav. Maybe you should check the chat also. Maybe she's writing in the chat. Seems like it's very difficult to
It's something about the archive in Edinburgh, Lavender Menace Queer Books Archive. Sounds interesting. There are quite a lot of different archives around the world. They're all wonderful.
Yeah, please connect Olav with that library, Sigrid. And to all of you, I could say that this is the first of webinars that the Nordic, the Network for Nordic Queer Archives and History has run. We have decided to give 3 webinars this year. So Cura was first out. The Nordic Network, as you know, is a network for Nordic and Baltic queer archives and history activities. And it's 3 partners in it. It's the Friends of Queer History in Finland. It's the Queer Archive, Shaped Archive in Norway. And it's the Archive and Library of the Queer Movement in Sweden. And the 3 of us will give 1 webinar each. And the Friends of Queer History in Finland, they also collaborate with the Labour Archive in Finland, as you could see when Iris was posing her question. And I think next out is actually the Finnish archive, the Labour Archive in Finland. And I think they will give 1 webinar in the end of September. And that will be announced at NAQS Network's webpage. So just search for the Network for Nordic for yeah, it's very hot in Sweden, I can tell you, in Stockholm. The Network for Nordic, the Nordic Network for Queer Archives and History Activities. Just search for on the web, and you will find our web page, and it will be announced also by mail to you when it's time for the next webinar. But it will be in the end of September. And then we will have one in the middle of December or in the beginning of December as well, hosted by Skeivt Archive in Norway. But thank you for being with us, and thank you so much, Olof, for presenting the Queer Lit project. And yeah, let's give Olof a warm hand. Can set up for that. And here is our technician, David from the Unstraight Museum. Thank you, David. Ciao. Have a nice summer.